It was 11 or 12 years ago that I sat down in a borrowed space in the downtown east side and had my first conversation with women in the downtown east side and asked them about what human rights issues mattered most to them. And thought about the fact that, 11 or 12 years later, I still can't talk about the work or really think about the work without getting kind of choked up. And I actually think that's a really good thing.
So Pivot started working on sex workers' rights 10 or more years ago. And at that time, the Pivot's kind of contribution to the movement was really out of pure necessity. It was at a time when there was an unbelievable epidemic of violence against sex workers in this community. It was prior to Picton's arrest. It was at a time when it was unimaginable to not be paying attention to the issue of sex workers' rights and to women's safety in this community.
Sex worker safety as one of the key priorities coming out of those original Pivot meetings really pushed us to work on this issue.
What we came up with was to do this affidavit project where we asked sex workers in the downtown east side, how do each of these laws impact you?
And at that time, Pivot was, exploring various political strategies, advocacy strategies to protect and advance the interests of sex workers in the downtown east side.
That work led into eventually litigation work when the political process failed to actually address the laws, and it became clear that a response from the courts was going to be necessary to actually achieve change with the laws.
We filed yesterday the Coalition's application for leave to intervene in Bedford in Canada. So we are hoping that SWAMP and joined by PACE and Pivot will have the opportunity to weigh in at the Supreme Court of Canada in Bedford.
The Bedford case is a case that was brought by 3 sex workers in Ontario, Terry Jean Bedford, Amy Leibovich, and Valerie Scott. And the 3 of them came forward really on behalf of the movement to fight for sex workers' rights.
The challenge in Bedford is to 3 laws, the Body House law, the living off the avails portion of the procuring law, and what's called the communication law, section 213 of the Criminal Code.
Given the appalling tragedy of the serial killer case in Vancouver and the long-term consequences of rigorous enforcement against sex workers in Vancouver, it is critical that the voices of those most directly impacted, street-based sex workers in the downtown east side, are heard in Canada's highest court. One of the reasons that they're so vulnerable to violence and exploitation are the laws.
The exchange of sexual services for money in Canada is not criminalized, but a number of activities around sex work are criminalized.
You can't do it in public because of the communicating law, you can't do it in private because of the Body House law, and you can't do it together with other sex workers because of the procuring provisions. The effect is to marginalize people who are involved in a visible sex trade to the extent that they are considered less valued and less than human in many ways because we've decided that we don't want to protect them.
They say you got a bylaw that you're not allowed to be on that corner, but then they shove you into the alley where it's a lot darker, and in that alley you can get totally beaten up, and whether or not the cops see you get beaten up, and they look at you like you deserve to be beaten up.
When sex workers were trying to report crimes against them to the police, they were sometimes told they got what they deserved, or they were told to come back next week and make a report.
I myself had the same experience when a big violent episode happened to me. What he did was he smashed everything in the house. The police did come, and I told them that it was a date, and as soon as I told them that, they stopped looking for him. In the next 2 months, I caught 2 soliciting charges. So to me, that fear that I had of reporting to the police was really validated, and I feel a lot of sex workers have experienced the same kind of thing, or their fears are true.
Sex workers, historically have a great distrust of the police, and yet it is the police are the ones who are supposed to be keeping them safe.
If the communicating law were not on the books, then sex workers wouldn't have to worry about avoiding criminal law detection and prosecution at a moment when what they should be worried about is this a safe interaction?
Sex workers, they told us in no uncertain terms that they are much safer if they have the ability to refer to a bad date sheet before they get into a vehicle, which is a piece of paper that gets handed out in this neighborhood and neighborhoods across the country, identifying predators, saying here is what you should look for in terms of men who are coming into this community and targeting sex workers.
We had 2 reports on 2 men
taking out girls and dragging them. And they're both in hospital in serious condition right now. And they let them both out of jail, and then as soon as I get word if something like that happened, I have to go make a report, write it out, and then try and get it out there to the girls and get into the red alert sheet so the women will know what to watch out for.
I'm not sure how anyone could ever hold up the framework that we have now and say that we should carry on with this social experiment because women are dying and that can't happen for one more day. So in terms of what people can get behind, I don't really care how you get there. I don't care what your sort of religious or spiritual or moral values say about whether or not exchanging sex for money is okay or not. But what I do care about is when those views are used to uphold laws that are risking and causing the loss of lives. So it's time for change, and that's what the case is about.
We should go into the court and actually draw and paint a picture for them of what it's really like to work on the street and what actually that conversation looks like, you know, before a sex worker would get into a vehicle. It's the full picture of like, okay, so what service do you want? Well, that's not what I provide. How much are you willing to pay? Meanwhile, she's like looking at door handles and looking in the back seat for rope. But the one point actually that I don't make that I continue to think is so crucial is the bad date sheet point. Like, that is the difference. Like, yeah, I mean, I basically just want to say you'll really have done nothing for sex workers who are still on the street.
Generally in society, a lot of things are stacked up for people who have means, who have money, who have connections, who have power. And then there are people without those things. And our argument there is that if the law can serve people without all of those things, then it better serves everyone.
June is going to be the ultimate culmination of all of this work. This is where we spend one day in front of 9 judges telling them in no uncertain terms that these laws are a matter of life or death for the women of this community. There's going to be a whole bunch of complex law happening and swirling around us, and we're going to go in with a really clear message that our clients have a clear vision for social change, but it requires legal change. It requires that the law support them, that their rights are valued, that they are allowed to take control over the conditions of their lives and access the supports that they deserve.
I think I just need to say, like, we wholeheartedly reject that. Like, the evidence does not support that finding, and there will always be measures that sex workers can take that will increase their safety, such as being able to work in safer locations, such as being able to access police, and this law makes both of those things impossible.
So do you think you save that for a question, or should we work that in right here?
We might need to work it in.
I think we put it in. We do.
It's too important.
It's too good.
Yeah.
So do you want to run through one more time? Oh no, you can't. You're occupied. Maybe we should just get ready to go.
Yeah, I think we've got like 10 minutes worth to go. We could do it one more time.
Yeah, would you like?
Does that seem?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm counsel for the interveners, Downtown Eastside Sex Workers United Against Violence Society, PACE Society, and Pivot Legal Society. Organizations that are committed to defending the rights of downtown Eastside sex workers, a group that this court has found to be some of the most marginalized members of society. As we spend today deliberating on important points of fact and law, it's of utmost importance to my clients that we not lose sight of the realities for street-based sex workers. They come to you from a community that has experienced an epidemic of missing and murdered women. A community in which sex workers struggle to survive under the laws at issue in these appeals, laws that prohibit safety and protection, and laws that deprive them of their personal security.
No matter what comes up today, we will always continue to fight. Woohoo! For justice and rights for sex workers. Woohoo! Yes! Our society treats street-based sex workers as if they were disposable. We are denied the rights and freedoms that other citizens enjoy, including equal protection under the law. We have waited 30 years for this historic day, and it is time for our voices to be heard and respected.
At tab 5 of our condensed book, you'll find a bad date sheet.
Many organizations across the country, including my clients, distribute these sheets throughout the community. Having adequate time to screen a client means having time to refer to the information on this sheet. And as you can see from the information before you on the bad date sheet, this can be a life-saving measure. For example, it gives a sex worker the time she needs to ensure that she does not get into vehicle with license plate number AWKB503. The driver of this vehicle is alleged to take sex workers down to the river and attempt to drown them. This is a perfect example in my submission of how time to communicate, time to screen can mean the difference between life and death for a street-based sex worker. Screening can mean the difference between life and death.
My heart's still pounding from when Katrina got up there. Just like,
I know I got teary-eyed too at the beginning. As I go, I turned away. It's like, okay, I got something in my eye. I got something in my eyes.
it's surreal.
It's been
so many years coming to this day.
That's right.
That'd be pretty amazing if a bunch of sex workers, like we've already opened it up to other marginalized groups to challenge laws, but if we can change the way challenges happen, like how crazy would that be?
Yeah, we can do anything.
We can do anything.
After this point, I think so too.
Felt like a victory in there today. To me, it seems like the court understood that these laws are archaic, they're dated, they're dysfunctional, they're putting people in harm's way, and they're not achieving the goals that they're supposed to be achieving.
It was great. I felt like in those 10 minutes I got to really connect with the justices, actually, and I think the point of connection was really around the bad date sheets. So despite the fact there's so much I felt like I wanted to say, I felt like that moment was really precious.
I think that we have to figure out, if this decision comes down positively for decrim, what are the next steps? How do we make sure that safety is of paramount concern to Parliament?
Do we want to be a nation that deals with complex social problems in a nuanced and modern and enlightened way? Or do we want to sort of use the blunt, repressive arm of the criminal law in order to deal with a complex social context, which sex work definitely is?
This piece of litigation that these three women initiated has the potential to shift the legal landscape in Canada fundamentally, change everything in terms of sex worker safety.
I think there's reason to believe Bedford's going to succeed, but even apart from Bedford, there's already been huge benefits achieved and huge social transformation.
This would make us the second and the largest democratic country in the world to decriminalize sex work. And that's a really important step for Canada to take as a world leader.